Good afternoon, where this afternoon the Public Accounts Committee is looking at the accounts of the Duchies of Cornwall and Lancaster. And I think this is an historic occasion. The Duchy of Cornwall was created by charter in 1337 when Edward III created his son, the Duke of Cornwall. And the Duchy of Lancaster, since 1399, the Duchy has passed each reigning monarch to provide a source of income. Now, I think this is probably the first time in which a parliamentary committee has examined the Duchy's accounts in this way. It's an unusual hearing for us in the Public Accounts Committee because it's not based on a report by the Controller and Auditor General. The Controller and Auditor General does not audit the Duchy's accounts and has no right of access to the underlying books and records. I should say that the long-standing policy of this committee is that we think that he should have such access in order to inform Parliament. However, we make one step at a time. Parliament has been about this business since the 17th century, so we continue to hope that we will get more and better access as the years pass. I should say, of course, that the Duchies are not responsible for the use made of the surpluses by the Prince of Wales household and the royal household, and the accounts of the Duchies do not cover the financial affairs of the household. So I shall be looking in my questions to ask our witnesses about these accounts. And we're joined today by, from the Duchy of Cornwall, Mr. Bertie Ross, who is Secretary and Keeper of the Records, and Mr. Keith Willis, who is Head of Finance, and from the Duchy of Lancaster by Mr. Paul Clark, who's the Chief Executive and Clerk of the Council, and Mr. Chris Adcock, who's the Chief Finance Officer. You're all very welcome at what I hope will be a fruitful occasion in which we can exchange information. Perhaps I could start by asking some questions, please, of Mr. Ross of the Duchy of Cornwall. Your revenue surplus has jumped from £6.9 million to £11.9 million in the last 5 years. Why has it done so, and why is it not taxed?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The reasons that it has grown are largely because of our investment strategy. We have been switching from long-held leases into commercial property. That's one point of gain. Another one has been through the change of some accountancy practices. And the third point has been the control of costs.
And why is it not taxed?
The tax is paid by the Prince of Wales on the revenue from the Duchy of Cornwall after costs are deducted.
Yes, he pays it, I think, on a voluntary basis, but it's not taxed in the same way the PLC would be taxed with corporation tax, is it?
The Duchy of Cornwall, like the Duchy of Lancaster, is exempt from the taxes, and the taxes that you're referring to are paid on a voluntary basis.
Do you want to give us an explanation for that?
I mean, these are matters of policy, really. I mean, they're issues that have been looked into by the Memorandum of Understanding. They're points that have been raised in a number of parliamentary debates about the tax position of the Queen and
All right,
of Wales.
Stop there. I don't think you're going to give us any more information. Thank you for that answer. Would you please look at page 2 of your accounts? It refers there to the Prince of Wales directions about the management of the Duchy. The Prince of Wales, of course, is chairman of the Prince's Council. Could there be a conflict of interest here with the risk of maximising income for the current beneficiary at the expense of future beneficiaries, given that the Prince of Wales is both the chairman of his council and the principal beneficiary?
Yes, the Prince of Wales is the owner of the income of the Duchy of Cornwall. And to a large extent, that income is at his direction. So the processes of the management of the estate are at the Prince of Wales's direction. The governance of the Duchy of Cornwall is very much controlled by the Treasury. And I think that in this debate, in this process of the hearing, we will seek to point out the very considerable control that we think that the Treasury has over the affairs of the Duchy of Cornwall.
All right, so you believe that there's no conflict of interest. That's your answer.
I think there is no conflict of interest. I think the interests of the Prince of Wales are in line with our long and often quoted terms of reference, which are to provide an income for the Prince of Wales, to provide income for the future Dukes, the future Dukes of Cornwall, and to manage in accordance with the Prince of Wales' interests.
Now, you'll be aware of Financial Reporting Standard 17. It concerns the treatment of retirement benefits in the employer's accounts and requires that any pension assets or liabilities that rest with an employer are recognised in its accounts. You'll be aware of that Financial Reporting Standard, and you'll be aware that the public sector best practices set out by the Treasury would have required adoption of Financial Reporting Standard 17 in the year ending 31st of March 2004. You're aware of that. Why did you not adopt Financial Reporting Standard 17 this year, when the effect of not doing so was to increase the surplus payable to the Prince of Wales by over £600,000?
I'm going to ask Mr. Willis if he'd be able to expand on this point for me, but I think this was a great change again that you're referring to as a change in accountancy practices.
Can you help us?
I hope so. FRS 17, which the Duchy does comply with, in accordance with the Companies Act and best practice, the Treasury Directive at the rear of our accounts points to the Duchy following best practice. Best company practice in relation to FRS 17 is to disclose only. You do not have to comply with FRS 17 through the accounts themselves.
All right. Can I now ask you, please, to look at Note 7 in your accounts, which you can find on page 16. It shows only a total figure there of investments of £47.6 million at the 31st of March 2004. Therefore, it's not possible for us or for anybody else outside to analyse the Duchy's investment strategy. Now, if you look at the Duchy of Lancaster's accounts, that's Note 13, you'll see there a breakdown of investments by types, equities, government securities, etc. Why can you not provide us with more information?
We provide you with the information by the assets that we own. We felt that that was in line with the directives of accountancy presentation that we've been asked to follow by the Treasury.
Well, have you seen Note 13, the Duchy of Lancaster's accounts?
No.
Well, if you look, has the witness got these accounts? I'm sure he has. If you look at page 17 of the Duchy of Lancaster's accounts, and if you look at Note 13, you'll see it sets out there considerably more information available to readers of these accounts concerning the Duchy of Lancaster than concerning the Duchy of Cornwall, where in your Note 7 there's virtually, or there is no information given at all.
I think in the case of the Duchy of Cornwall, the stock exchange portfolio at a value of 47 million, i.e. roughly 10% of the Duchy's asset base, is considerably less than the Duchy of Lancaster. I do take your point.
Is it something you'll consider anyway?
We will consider it. We are aware of the requirements of FRS 13 in relation to, which applies to listed companies only, but that would require more disclosure. So yes, we will consider it.
Okay, now can I please now turn to the Duchy of Lancaster. Why did you close your pension scheme to new entrants in 2002?
It was decided to close it, and in fact I joined the Duchy in 2000 and I was the first person who wasn't within the Duchy of Lancaster scheme. The view was, along with a lot of other organisations, that we wouldn't continue with a final salary scheme because there was some volatility in the payments that had to be made into the fund. So what we do now is that we provide a money purchase scheme for new members of staff on the basis of 10% of their salary up to the age of 50 and then 13% of salary beyond.
Okay. You'll recall in our correspondence last year that I suggested on behalf of the committee that you set up an audit committee. Have you yet done so?
We have been going through the combined code in some detail, and since we last wrote, we're about to put a paper to council, in fact tomorrow, where we're hoping to adopt the code in relation to corporate governance in general, and also with regard to, in particular, an audit committee. Where we don't comply with the corporate governance, we will explain, and we hope to initiate that for the new financial year.
Okay, perhaps this is a question I can ask to both of you, or one of you can answer this. The duchies occupy some of their own property rather than renting it out. How do you decide whether it's a good use of resources for the duchy to occupy its own properties, thereby foregoing rental income?
Can I?
Yes.
Sorry. In fact, we occupy very little property within our own portfolio. The only main building we have is 1 Lancaster Place, which was our office. We are in the process of refurbishing it at the moment. And to that extent, due to the reduction in size, we are only taking about 1.5 floors of that building, and we are subletting the surplus space. Okay, now can I ask you a slightly technical question? I think it's quite important. A proportion of staff costs and certain development costs are taken out of the revenue account and charged to the capital account, which increases the level of the surpluses payable to the Queen and the Prince of Wales. Why have you not set out your accounting policies in this area? Chris, do you want to?
What I'll say about that is you are correct that we do recharge where time has been spent on capital projects. We do recharge a cost, a worked out cost from income to capital. The amounts concerned are very small. They're between £100,000 and £200,000 per annum, and as such we don't think, we haven't considered that worthy of a note.
All right, thank you very much. Could I just finally ask the Treasury? The Duchy of Cornwall particularly generates very significant assets, revenue for the Prince of Wales, and the Duchy of Lancaster generates significant revenue for the Queen. What I'd like to know from the Treasury is whether any assessment is ever made as to how well the two duchies, which generate these very different surpluses, support the relative needs of the households of the Queen and the Prince of Wales. I mean, have we set up this revenue in the right way? Is the Queen and the Prince of Wales getting the sort of income they need? Or is this really an accident of history?
No, Chairman, I don't think we have given that any consideration, certainly not in recent past. And I'm not sure that we consider it part of our function to do so in the context of the two duchies. The two duchies, as you say, were set up some considerable time ago to provide an income, and how much they generate really is, as you say, a matter of.
Well, it's an accident. It's just they were set up in a certain way, starting with Edward III, and it may be that they are producing too much or too little for the sort of the need, for instance, for the needs of the Prince of Wales. I mean, it seems to me it'd be quite sensible for the Treasury to make an assessment of this.
Well, I will give some consideration to your view, Chairman.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Ross, I'll be addressing my questions entirely to you because there isn't time to do justice to two of the accounts. Since 1990, the 300% increase that the Prince has had in income is actually represented in bank terms as £82 million he's received over that time, in addition to which he's received another £3 million slipped from the undistributable reserves, a matter which I've raised before. Can't you understand that an average of £6 million a year for 14 years may to the public look as if a prince is winning the lottery every year?
My duty in looking after the Duchy of Cornwall is to operate within the terms that apply within the legislation and the statutes. It is for me to provide a proper income from well-managed estates. I think for me to comment on the sums of money is not relevant in this occasion.
Well, with respect, you've already brought a value judgment in because you said it's for you to decide what is a proper income. So you are involved at all levels on this. Now, again, the county, you see, you live in such a closeted world, you take these things and all the privileges that go with it for granted. But to my constituents, 11.9 million last year is an incomprehensible sum. It's just a set of numbers on a piece of paper. But if I could put 450 of my constituents, all of whom earn the national average wage, into one hall, their collective incomes for a year would be precisely the same as the prince's, same as 450 of his subjects. So proper is a term I think you may have to qualify at some time during our discussions. Don't you think 11.9 is getting a bit excessive? Shouldn't there be some sort of ceiling?
The point I was trying to make earlier on is a return on the assets of the Duchy of Cornwall. The accounts stated that the assets at the end of 2004 were 463 million. What we're addressing is what is the reasonable term, or what is the proper income that the Prince of Wales should receive from those estates. I think that the subject of whether it's a large amount of money or not is not really my issue. But the point I would, if I may...
But it is proper that he should receive £3 million more than the Queen.
But I think
Really,
the point I would go on to make is that this is the result of the estate being well managed. I rather feel that I would be in a less comfortable position if we were appearing for you on an estate that had problems.
Okay, we're not getting anywhere here because you just don't understand how these sort of sums of money are perceived. And of course, what it doesn't take into account, in addition to this 80 million, he has the best housing benefit scheme in the world. Clarence House, still part of Lambeth Palace, use of Windsor Castle. Not bad as a little side perk of a job, is it?
Well, maybe I could put it in context of what the income is used for.
I don't really need to know that at the moment.
Well,
I'll ask you when I want to know that. Because otherwise you're going to have to explain why it's risen from 3 million to 12 million. And that will probably come up later with one of my colleagues' questions. Can we move then to something that's puzzling me slightly about last year's report? The revenue side of your accounts borrowed 1.2 million from capital. Now, that inevitably boosted the money that was available to contribute to the surplus, didn't it? It therefore made 1.2 million available for dispersal to the Prince, which would not otherwise have been there. Now, why?
I don't think it was for dispersal to the Prince. No,
Well, it effectively is bound to be, isn't it? You can't have 1.2 million coming into revenue and then it not affecting the amount that's available to the Prince because he has the next surplus from revenue. So by definition it affects
I'll try to ask the question first and then I may get Mr. Willis to tidy up if I've missed the point. This borrowing from the capital account is to enable us to carry out our responsibilities, which are repairs, paying staff and things of those kinds. It is our duty to pay the Prince of Wales net of the cost that we incur.
Yes.
And I may
Yes, but it's the revenue.
If I could clarify, the 1.2 million you referred to, he did not borrow the 1. We did not borrow the 1.2. We could go up to a maximum of 1.2.
I see. What did you
last
borrow
year
then?
we probably borrowed 600, something like that.
Oh, well,
no, the
pocket
600,000 borrowing. Interest is charged on the borrowing. Interest is charged to the revenue account,
Yes, but
i.e. he receives less because of the borrowing.
No, he doesn't. He receives
Yes, he does.
he receives £600,000 more by definition. He
No.
wouldn't have had that 600,000.
It's
Anyway,
not money
I've got
that's
much
distributed. It's
more
not money
important.
that's distributed, though.
I've got much bigger sums than that we can look at. But before I go on to some of the bigger sums, the pension scheme has been in deficit for 2 years, hasn't it? And if I read the accounts correctly, it's £637,000 in deficit. Now, why couldn't you have cut back on the surplus going to the Prince for that? Because he still have had over £11 million.
Well, I think by comparison with many organisations, our
Yeah, but you're not short of a bob or two.
I know, but let me say our pension fund is in a very healthy situation. And in fact, we were in credit. And the recent actuarial valuation we had carried out at the end of last year intimated that we were in credit. It was the introduction of the new FRS 17 process of assessment that highlighted this shortfall. And I think it's something that we will be able to rectify very, very quickly.
But the effect of both of those, the borrowing of 600,000 for 1.2 and the non-payment of £637,000 boosted the Prince's income by over £1.2 million together. Now let's look at a strange situation that arose in 1998 when you really stretched your credit status. When you borrowed, according to note 14 of that year, borrowed £10 million at a staggering 10.48% loan stock repayable in 2014 at an interest rate of £1 million a year. What was that all about?
So I think it was in, which year did
1998.
Okay, I think it was the 10 years before.
It's borrowed in 1989, the £10 million that you referred to.
Anyway, the point of your question is not altered. This was money that was borrowed, as we are fully entitled to do under the terms of the Management Act.
I didn't say you weren't entitled.
No, but it was with the purpose. But it was with the purpose of setting up or taking forward our investment strategy. And I think it was a good commercial decision by judgment with hindsight.
Mm-hmm. Now, rather strangely, I have trouble sleeping, but I keep a stock of old Dutch of Cornwall accounts alongside the bed just in case. And the other evening I came across this one from 1999, which coincides, of course, coincidentally with the information in 1998, which I also have alongside the bed. And in this it says in note 15 on page 16, repayments to capital. On 31st of March 1999, the Duchy of Cornwall revenue account, that's the account from which the Prince gets his money, had annual commitments to repay to the capital account, and he's not allowed capital, to repay to the capital account as follows. And as follows is year ended March 31st March 1998, £14 million. Year ended 31st of March 1999, £14 million. What were those figures all about, and were they in any way related to the other 10 million we've just been talking about?
They were not related to the 10 million. At that stage, repayments were made from the revenue account to capital in accordance with the figures you've outlined.
So what was the total sum that was due to be repaid? Was it the combined 2 years, 28 million or what?
Sorry, the 28 million you're referring to comes
There was
from...
14 million listed as to be paid in 1998, and then 14,299,000 for 1999. Now it may be in the same money, but it's not easy to tell from the account. Is it just 14 million, a mere 14, or is it a 28 million pound debt?
You're referring to 1999 accounts,
Yeah.
did you say? Sorry, which page number would that be?
Page 16, I've marked it up if you want to borrow
Page
a
16.
copy.
At that stage, the total, at 1999, the total commitments was the 14.2.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of money, isn't it?
Indeed.
And one of the ways in which you operate is the Prince does not have access to capital. That's laid down in the statute. And yet here you've been farming out capital to the revenue account, which decides the amount of income the Prince has, which therefore is giving him access to the capital account. Therefore, you've been in breach of the rules.
There is no breach of the rules. That was in accordance with the conditions laid down in the Management Acts. that revenue repay capital over the appropriate time period.
Well, I'll leave it to my colleagues to follow up on that. I'll finish because I mustn't. There are so many questions, but I'll come back later if they've not been asked. One final one. In 0304, you had a sale of investment properties, and you received £29.4 million for them. The book value was 20.6, leaving a profit, a nice healthy profit, and I'm not criticising that, that's your job, of 8.8 million. But somehow, only 6.9 million found its way into the capital accounts. So where's the other 1.9 million gone?
You're comparing their cash figures against accrual accounting figures. These accounts are done on an accruals basis. You can't compare cash received against book value. Some of the cash received was not recognised as sales. It was deposits received for sales that will be recognised in future years.
Sir John, the National Audit Office has briefed on this. Is what we've just heard correct? And if it's correct, were the accounts sufficiently clear in what was represented by that 8.8 million? And still at the end of it, we don't know, as a result of your answer, what happened to the other 1.9 million.
There was no missing, sorry.
Well, where is it?
You're comparing two different things. You're comparing a cash...
I'm comparing money with money.
No, you're comparing cash against accrual accounting. One is a cash flow, the other is a balance sheet and profit and loss.
Sir John, I'll finish up.
Well, the account given by Mr. Willis is correct in terms of accountancy. I think there is a point I might ask my colleague to enlarge on the question of whether the accounts might be prepared in a clearer way.
Well, it wasn't crystal clear from the face of the accounts, and
It should have been, though, shouldn't it?
it was difficult to work through.
Well, if it's difficult for the National Audit Office to work through it, what hope have humble members of Parliament or the public got of working their way through it? Well, I think the case is there to be answered, and you haven't answered it. And I still don't know where the £1.9 million is, but perhaps we'll find out eventually. Thank you, Chairman.
Can you try and make the accounts more clear in the future?
As far as our accounts are concerned, they're dealt with by direction with the Treasury. We're very positive in our attitude about this. We meet them on a every other month basis. We discuss these things, and I would certainly be happy to go back and talk about the points that are being raised with the Treasury after this meeting.
Because you just heard the comment of the National Audit Office. That it was difficult to work through.
Yeah, understood.
Mr. Steenberg.
Thank you, Chair. You said the estates were well managed, Mr. Ross. Mr. Clark, how do you know they're well managed? Because you work from a very privileged position and not having to pay tax. You're cushioned. So how do you know that you're well and efficiently managed?
We run a number of benchmarks against the performance of our portfolio, and that starts with a composite benchmark which is broken down and marries in with our various investments, and we also then measure each individual part of the portfolio against standard industry benchmarks. The property.
Where do you come out in that?
We've consistently outperformed.
You consistently
outperformed. We're better than the benchmark.
Incidentally, how do you get on the committee, the committee that runs these organisations? Looks like a job for the boys, is it?
Do you mean the council?
Yes.
The council is appointed much the same as any other organisation. We've in fact just appointed 2 new council members. That was done through advertising in the cabinet.
Excellent. Well, look, I'm retiring at the end. I'm retiring at the end of this Parliament, and right. My services will be open for negotiation, particularly if they're on the expenses that I see the Duke of Westminster gets.
Duke of Westminster isn't on our council.
No, but he's on Mr. Ross's.
He is indeed.
So, if you'd like this after the meeting, yeah? we'll have a little word. The revenue surpluses are increasing, aren't they, year by year and year by year, and they're substantially increasing, Mr. Ross, in the Duchy of Cornwall. Tell me, on page 23 of the accounts, and Mr. Williams has mentioned this, you sought approval to borrow, as he said, £1.2 million from the capital accounts for revenue purposes. Now, when I was on the council and leader of Durham City, we fiddled as well. It was called a creative accountancy. And if we wanted to get some money from one area to another area, which you weren't supposed to do, then we creatively accounted so we could use that money. This looks very much like jiggery-pokery to me.
Yeah,
it looks as though you've been doing a bit of fiddling, haven't you? Eh?
I don't see it that way at all.
Hmm?
No, if I look at it with my hat on protecting the capital account, I'm very happy to...
But the Prince of Wales can't touch the capital, can he?
In this case...
But he can touch revenue. So if we put the capital into the revenue...
No, this is the revenue, the capital account being paid interest for a loan that is then used to run the business.
Sorry, say it again.
The capital account is charging interest
Right.
to the revenue account for the use of the money, the facility that is there.
Well, explain. You see, the revenue account is substantially increasing each year, and the capital account fell from 29.5 million to 2.8 million in a period of 4 years. Is that right? Well, that's what the report says. Seems to indicate that.
No, I don't know those figures. Our capital account has grown very substantially since we've started.
The surplus in the capital account, according to the report as I read it, the surplus of the capital account fell from 29.5 million to 2.8 million in 4 years. The surplus. And yet you were still lending from the capital surplus, which was decreasing considerably, to the revenue surplus, which was increasing substantially. I can't understand that. As I say, I'm not an auditor or an accountant, but that seems peculiar to me. Why would you be doing that?
Again, they're not figures I recognise. The capital account has increased significantly over the last X number of years. 180 million in the last 5 years. Increase.
The capital account has gone up by 65% since we've been measuring it and publishing the results of our capital account.
Okay, then ask another question. Is the capital cash being systematically transferred to the revenue account?
No.
No.
Not in my opinion. No, I mean, we draw a very clear line between the capital...
Well, it seems to me that the National Audit Office have got it wrong then. Because from the information that I've sort of read from the National Audit Office, they appear to be insinuating that's happening. Perhaps the National Audit Office could inform us. Am I right or wrong?
Mr. Steenberg, I think the position is that the capital account cash balance, so it's not the entire capital account value.
No.
It is the level of cash in the capital account fell from 29.5 million in 2000 to 2.8 million in 2000.
That's what I said.
Yes.
You're looking only at the capital cash balance,
yes,
which has fallen, indeed it has fallen through that period due to property acquisitions. That's agreed.
So we spent the money on capital.
So my question is, if it's falling considerably from, and you said it didn't, so...
No, the capital value of the duchy, sorry.
No, I wasn't talking about you weren't obviously listening, were you? Because I said the surplus capital account, the cash. I didn't say anything about the total capital value. So what I'm saying is if the surplus cash is decreasing from 29.5 million to 2.8 million, why are you borrowing from that to the revenue account?
First of all, the 29.5 that you refer to was a one-off peak in capital cash terms before a major acquisition took place within the following few months. That 29.5 is very untypical of the capital accounts cash balance.
So what was it used for?
The 29.5?
Well, the capital cash, yes. What's that being
to buy an agricultural estate.
And how much has been transferred to the revenue account, which the Prince has access to?
How much capital has been transferred to the revenue account?
How much capital cash?
As I mentioned before, at any one point, it may borrow, and I stress borrow, in the region of 600,000.
Right. Okay then. 600,000. Your organisations, both your organisations, seem to me to have no transparency at all. I mean, you look at them and you could be looking at sort of double Dutch, really, unless you have someone to look at them for you who really understands accounts. And I think Mr. Williams has made this point. For example, the accounts show that in 2002-03, £300,000 of development work was just written off. But it doesn't say what it was written off for and why it was written off. Why was it written off?
This is a cost to the revenue account. So this was directly a deduction from the surplus that the Prince of Wales would have received. And the reason being was that if we had moved ahead with this particular development project, it would have added to the capital asset. So once we got planning permission or whatever the circumstances was, it would have added to the capital value of that particular project. Because the project has not progressed on the rate and on the way that we thought it should, we thought that the right process was to charge this to the revenue account. So it was a step taken that decreased the surplus to the Prince of Wales.
All right. So can the Prince of Wales can in fact use the whole of the surplus of the revenue account?
No.
Well, explain what he can use then. Because I got the impression...
Well, the total revenue account in these accounts, I think, is something in the order of £16 million. From that are deducted the normal running costs of the business that we incur.
I don't think you listen. I said the surplus. So presumably all the expenses have been taken off. The surplus, what's left at the end of the year, the profit, if you like, on the revenue account, that all goes to the Prince of Wales.
That's exactly the purpose that we exist for.
Yes, right. So how much is that on an average per year?
Last year it was £11.9 million.
And what can he use that £11.9 million for?
It's private income. It's entirely at his discretion to use what he wants to. And the point I wanted to make is that he does use it for his official duties and his private purposes. And what I would like to do is just make a small point about those official duties, because again, I think the sums of the money is well used. It's to support the Queen.
Say that again. I'm sorry. You're going to, I think the way this committee works is that you're going to take my time up, I'm afraid, if you do that. So
well,
I suggest you do
3 quick answers.
Go on, then.
Support the Queen, charitable enterprises, and national and traditional excellence. Now, he is paying something in the order of £3.2 million worth of salaries alone for those purposes out of his own private income. The charity generates in the order of £100 million a year. I mean, this is a figure that is often stated and not realised. He is the biggest multi-purpose charitable enterprise in the country.
Well, okay, let's just ask another question. I also read in the report that you're now starting to use, and you say it comes out of the revenue account, but you're also now starting to use capital cash to pay staff costs. Is that right?
Correct.
Well, if you're using capital cash to pay staff costs, it means that you're not using the revenue cash, which means that allows the Prince to have extra money through the back door.
This is very much in accordance with accountancy best practice. And
you mean a creative accountancy that I mentioned you earlier?
I don't know. You'll be referring. These are two clear distinctions. We do a lot of work on the capital account, which is buying, selling, and improving. Those charges are charged legitimately and in accordance with best practice to the capital account.
Right, I've got to ask, and my time's up, but I'll ask you just one more question, and I saw this and I didn't know whether I read it right, and I'm just going to ask you, is it right that anybody who dies in Cornwall, intestate, the Prince inherits?
The money, this is one of the traditional things that we've inherited.
Now this is a yes or a no?
No, the answer is it goes to the Prince of Wales and he puts it into a benevolent fund.
And then what's that used for? And then what's that used for?
It's a charity, and it's used for education, religion. We try to focus it back into the area from which it has come.
All right, thank you.
Well, just summing up that, we've got a situation where you're increasing the revenue surplus, aren't you, by charging staff and development costs to capital. You accept that. Now, what is being suggested to you is that you haven't got clear policies, and there is scope, I'm sure it doesn't happen, but there is scope for these costs to be treated inappropriately. Would you accept that?
I don't think so.
Well, there is scope.
If you can tell me more.
Or why do you not set out your accounting policies more clearly and in more detail so that you can convince committees like this that is indeed not happening? Because you are a highly reputable organisation.
Indeed, I mean, we go a long way. We think that the information we provide is good. This is in line with corporate account publication. We have an auditor of national reputation. It is then submitted to our own audit committee, and after that it goes through the Treasury, who have the right to direct any way and terms in which our accounts are presented.
All right, thank you. Mr. Sheridan.
Thank you. Could I ask either representative or both representatives, has either or both estates received any funding whatsoever from EU farm subsidies?
As far as Lancaster is concerned, we don't farm any land in hand. All our farms are let, and therefore any EU subsidies is a matter between the tenant and the authorities. So we don't actually receive any of the subsidies direct.
Neither estate receives any subsidies from
No, I'm speaking for Lancaster.
And in the same way, the farming, what have now become the single farm payments are received by our tenants.
So just to clarify, neither estate receives any money whatsoever from the EU in terms of farm subsidies.
In terms of the single farm payment, no.
I'm asking a perfectly straightforward question here.
It's a matter of how you express this. I mean,
I'll tell you how I'll express it. We have people in the third world dying of starvation. We have the richest landowner in this country receiving EU farm subsidies, and I'm asking a perfectly straightforward question: how much?
We let these businesses, we let all the farms to tenants, and the tenants are individual farmers who have the right to run their business. I mean, this is the terms of the Agricultural Holdings Act. Those tenants are the people who are drawing down the single farm payments.
It seems to me that you're refusing to answer my question. If either or both estates are receiving...
The exact, I mean, it does indirectly go to the tenant, well, in the sense that it is on duchy land.
So you do get farm subsidies?
It goes to the tenants.
So you do indirectly, you do get farm subsidies, EU farm subsidies?
Not directly.
Indirectly?
If a tenant is carrying out a business on our land and they receive a rent, and that is deemed to be indirectly, the answer would be yes.
Thank you. Have we any idea how much that is?
I'm afraid I don't know, because we don't know the details of all the farmers' profit and loss accounts.
Just on the question of Clarence House, which has just been refurbished at cost, I estimate something like £9 million. Did the Duchy meet any of the costs of this refurbishment?
This is outside our area of remit completely. We hand over the surplus to the Prince of Wales and his office, and the matter of how the money is spent and how the amount of money is counted for is not Duchy business.
I think that's the Fifth Amendment. Just going back to the point that Mr. Steinberg raised about the pension fund, £1.1 million deficit in the pension fund. Would it not be right and proper that we ask Her Majesty to fund this deficit from the surplus?
At the present time, we are paying money into the pension scheme, and that does come out of the surplus.
How much is that?
We're paying at the moment £143,000 a year, and we've increased the contribution to 16.3% for all members of staff within the scheme, and the deficit now on MFR basis, we are at 93%, which is over the 90% threshold that we have to achieve in 10 years, and we've achieved that in 3 years.
Mr. Ross, can I ask a question about there's £300,000 of development work was written off during 2002 and 2003. Could you maybe account for why that happened?
This was a project that we were taking forward with the costs being incurred on professional advice, on legal advice, on those types of issues. We've decided that the prospect of this particular scheme progressing in the reasonably near future is not sufficiently good for it to be held in our books, so we've written it off against the revenue account. It's been deducted from the surplus.
Well, I'm glad that's within your remit. Again, can I say there is a significant difference in terms of staff costs? According to this report, one estate is paid something, one worker per estate is paid something like £57,000, and the other one some £32,000. I mean, what kind of people do you employ that deserve these kind of wages, and why is there such a difference in the gap?
Can I pick up on that question? Because I think the £57,000 that you mentioned there actually is the Duchy of Lancaster, but that £57,000 is actually inclusive of pension contributions, which, as Paul Clark stated, have actually been inflated in 2004 because we're making additional payments totalling £60,000 to catch up the deficits. In addition to that, the way that we calculate the average salary is fairly crude, which is taking the beginning and closing balances, which can be misleading on the timing of people beginning and starting within the year. I can say that average salary isn't £57,000, it's £33,600 over the 14 people within the Duchy of Lancaster.
And what are the skills required for these people?
The people are split into three main areas. You've got head office staff, survey staff, and other costs, which is magistracy, tributary, and other special costs. The head office staff is mainly finance, which is myself and two others, and the chief executive and his secretary. Our skills are obviously dependent on the roles that we're carrying out. The survey staff skills are obviously dependent on their skills, but they're mainly surveyors.
Because we're a small team, we have a high proportion of qualified and professional people. So within that survey office and survey staff, you've got some 2 qualified chartered surveyors and 2 secretaries in support, plus estate workers. Whereas at head office, or what we put into head office cost, I'm a chartered surveyor, Mr. Adcock is a chartered accountant, and we have a bookkeeper accountant. So, I mean, there is a fairly high degree of qualified people within that group.
Okay, Mr. Ross, I can see that certain duchy properties are used by the Prince of Wales office and for staff living accommodation. Can you tell me just how these properties are allocated and how the rents are determined?
They are occupied and rented out under the appropriate legislation, with the full open market rent being paid.
What does that mean?
The Duchy of Cornwall owns the properties, and we let them to the occupiers.
What criteria do you use to let them?
The open market rent.
So anyone can apply?
Those particular houses are occupied, but as far as other properties we have are concerned, they are advertised on a regular basis.
Now, can anyone apply to be allocated one of these properties?
In fact, as these houses become empty, we will sell them.
That's not a question I asked you.
Can anybody apply? There is no opportunity to apply because they're not vacant.
And if they do become vacant, you'll be selling them anyway?
It is the rent that is the determining factor that they should be let on the open market. So I mean, there are other houses in the same road, I'm sure, that would be available to rent at the same time.
I asked you a question about the criteria for those who wish to apply or be allocated one of these properties. As I understand what you said, is when they become vacant, they will be sold. You don't have any vacant properties just now, but when they become vacant...
I think the ones you were particularly referring to are ones that were occupied by members of the staff. Right. Other houses that we have to let, we do let on the open market in almost every case, which are open to anybody to apply to move into.
And how are the rents determined?
By the open market.
Okay. Again, just your accounts refer to 3 substantial property acquisitions in 2003-4. Could you give us some details about that?
Yes. Our strategy has been to invest in commercial property. We think it's our responsibility to produce a suitable return on the assets that we have. A number of the assets are very low producing, either because they're long leases, they're residential properties, or whatever. These ones that we bought were 3 commercial properties, one in Leeds, one in Dover, and I think one in Lancashire.
Okay. Just finally, Chair, given that there is significant amounts of taxpayers' money that goes towards both estates, and given the fact that in recent years many industries who did not receive the same kind of subsidies were then subsequently privatised, do you think either state or both estates would survive as PLCs?
As far as Lancaster is concerned, we've never really considered or done any figures on what effect tax would have on it, but I'm quite convinced that as a business it would survive.
And Mr. Ross?
The business is extremely well run.
Would it survive as a PLC
Would
and
it
save the
survive as a
taxpayer
PLC?
money?
Well, we operate within the terms that are defined to us at the moment, and that's speculation, but we are a good business.
But both estates would survive as PLCs.
I regard it as an academic question. We're not even a company.
Okay.
So we wouldn't be able to compare.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ross, you said earlier in a phrase that I thought strikingly melded the personal and the corporate in a way that must happen often dealing with royalty. You said, he is the biggest multi-purpose charitable enterprise in the country.
Correct.
Now, a cynic would say, well, give any of us £12 million a year tax-free with no responsibilities except buying big cars and fretting about the environment, and we could all be significant multi-purpose charitable institutions. However, I, being no such cynic, my reaction was quite the opposite. I thought, biggest multi-purpose charitable enterprise in the country, hell of a guy. Hell of a guy, and I want a piece of that, I thought. I want to do my bit. And I decided that, like Mr. Steenberg, although more seriously in my case and at the other end of my career, I also would like to be on the Prince's Council. And I'd like to know how to go about it, please.
We are in different areas. I mean, the charity side of his business is run by his office, not by the Duchy of Cornwall.
Sorry, the Prince's Council, which is the non-executive board of 11, of which you're the one executive member, which advises the Duchy on all its activities. Is that not the case?
Indeed, yeah. We're not a company. The Prince's Council is purely advisory. And at the moment, these appointments are made by the Prince of Wales because he goes to senior members of industry to give him advice on the areas that he regards to be particularly relevant to the Duchy of Cornwall. And this covers finance, law, environment, Cornwall in particular, the tenant farmer, and other such issues related to our business.
So it's not actually akin to the non-executive board of a PLC.
It's not.
It's more like a few of his mates.
Sorry?
A few of his mates.
It is by appointment of the Prince of Wales. In every other respect, we conform with the relevant requirements about appointing people. We advertise, we select people through a process of shortlists and interviews, and so forth.
So, but in terms of governance, what does that mean? Effectively, it means where does the buck stop? Does it stop with you? It obviously doesn't stop with his mates.
No.
So does it stop with you or with him?
We are extremely positive about our governance. Something we actually think is done well and structured in an effective way. And the governance starts with our own internal committee procedures, which meet regularly. They have members of the Prince's Council on it to ensure that there is a suitable, if you like, non-executive input. We have an auditor, we have an audit committee, and eventually the control of the Treasury is very significant. It has complete power of veto over capital transactions if it felt that they were not being done either for good commercial reasons or for the best interest of the management of the estate.
Given that you're so keen on governance, although it seems to me like a pretty rum kind of governance, I have to say, but given that you're so keen on governance and indeed pleased with your governance, why not introduce the same kind of voluntarism into your attitude to governance that has been so admirably displayed by the Prince in his attitude to tax? Was it 1994 when he took the enviable step of opting to pay income tax? Not that he had to, but that he chose to. Enviable and admirable. Why doesn't the Duchy, not that you have to, but opt to be scrutinised by the National Audit Office? Because if you don't opt to show the NAO your books like everybody else gets to show their books, people will naturally conclude that you have something to hide.
The Duchy of Cornwall's income is private to the Prince of Wales. And I think that any estate or business that is private should be able to choose its own auditors. I'm very satisfied that we have a balance of a nationally recognised good auditor looking after the private side,
Forgive me,
and then we have the Treasury.
Would you
looking
mind
after
if
the
I
capital.
just stopped you there, just to go back to that bit where you say his income is private to the Prince of Wales? We accept that. Well, we don't accept that, but for the sake of this forum today, we'll accept that once you hand over the £12 million cash that you've arbitrarily decided, with no scrutiny from anybody at all, is to be this year's tranche. Once you hand it over, then what he does with it, although we can see a certain amount of it, is private. But to say that his income is private, when his income is derived from his capital, is surely a rather meretricious, not to say sophistic distinction. Is his capital private?
The estate is owned by the Prince of Wales as a limited owner. It is a fine distinction. But effectively, he does not have access to the capital or the right to dispose of the capital, but he has absolute right to determine the income as to whether it is high or low, providing we operate within the strict investment criteria that we have to satisfy in dealing with the Treasury.
So is his capital private?
No. The capital is not accessible to the Prince of Wales.
It's not accessible to the Prince of Wales. It is accessible in the sense that he's able to determine how much of it is used and in what to generate what levels of revenue. But the capital is not accessible. If the capital is not private, then why can the National Audit Office of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland not investigate, audit, assess, do that helpful and useful job that it does for everybody else? And if you're so pleased with your governance, what have you got to hide? Why will you not let the NAO in to look at your books?
Every transaction that we do is submitted to the Treasury. And in a recent report that I received, it was pointed out that the detail into which we are going has greatly increased. This is by agreement. We are very happy to provide that information to the Treasury.
Could I pause you there for a moment again? Could I ask the Comptroller, Sir John, is that right? Are you happy, or would you like to have a look at the books?
I would like to have a look at the books.
I thought you might. Please, do continue.
I'd just say that that doesn't take away the value of what Mr. Ross says he provides to the Treasury. But the Treasury is part of executive government. My responsibility is to Parliament. If I looked at the books, I would be able to report to Parliament on those matters that I thought should be drawn to Parliament's attention. And that's the difference between my access and the access provided to the Treasury.
Indeed, Mr. Ross, it's about Parliament. Now, Sir John is, I think, in his office, probably even more ancient than very large. I took care to say his office than very large other parts of the British establishment, including most of the royal family. He's a fairly posh geezer, not as posh as the people on this list. A list more packed with DLs, G, CV, KM letters. Every letter you can think of is on this list of the Prince's Council, except the letters MP. Given that we would like to have a look at your books, the Comptroller and Auditor General, I think on behalf of the Queen... Do you work for the Queen, Sir John?
Well, in the sense that ultimately we all do, yes. But I am an officer of the House, and my first loyalty goes to the House of Commons.
Well, we would very much like to have a look at the books. Given that you're so proud of your governance, given that you're dashing backwards and forth from the Treasury every 20 minutes, asking them to check on the latest thing, why not just let us have a look? let them have a look.
I'm satisfied that the arrangement we have with Price Waterhouse auditing our books on the private side of the Prince of Wales's business, and I don't see the difference between that and any other private business. Does the job sufficiently? I'm quite certain that the National Audit Office would do the job just as well. But this is a procedure that was set out for us to follow in the 1982 Management Act. And I haven't seen a strong enough reason yet to do it differently. I'm satisfied that the private account is
my time is running out. So I just want to go back to what it seems to me is the essence of this question about capital and revenue. In that I wasn't clear until I thought you said it a minute ago. It is entirely at the Prince's discretion how much revenue he wants for himself. So if he says to you, because we know there's no point in him saying anything to the Prince's Council, which is touted as some sort of piece of governance, because actually it's just a gang of his mates. If he says to you, what I'd like you to do is maximise revenue this year. I don't want 12 million, I want 120 million next year. Do you have a fiduciary responsibility to say, no, sir, that would be irresponsible and a breach of our trust to future Dukes of Cornwall? Or do you say, you want 120 million, you're the biggest multi-purpose charitable enterprise in the country, no doubt you know what to do with it, go for it, sir, and start selling stuff?
We wouldn't be able to do it. As soon as we entered the realms of damaging the capital account, our capital transactions...
Every pound you take in revenue damages the capital account in some sense of opportunity cost. That's what every member of the committee understands. It's what everybody out there understands. And you and your colleagues are the only people who don't understand that there is a trade-off between capital and revenue. They don't exist independently. They trade off one from the other. If he wants to do down the capital in order to maximise revenue, what do you say?
We wouldn't get very far, because the whole procedure would be shut down, I'm almost certain, by the Treasury.
Thank you.
In the Prince's Councils, are there discussions about these matters? We were asking you earlier in this committee hearing about the fact that you charge staff development cost to capital. Would these matters be raised in the Prince's Council with him present?
We look at our strategy and all the issues relevant to that strategy and the implementation of it.
In the Prince's Council?
In the Prince's Council.
With him present?
And we have a finance committee that reports on all these matters to the Prince's Council, and the Prince of Wales either sees the minutes or attends the meeting.
Given that the Prince of Wales can draw down revenue but not capital, do you think that it is good practice for him to be taking part in discussions on this matter?
I'm still satisfied that all the documents that I've ever read have said the control of the Treasury is sufficient to ensure that the capital account is protected. Now, the capital account is protected if we grow it only by the rate of inflation. Our duty is to ensure an income for the present and the future Dukes. Over the last few years, and not as a result of the particular management that you're looking at today, but the steps that have been taken by people over the last 20 or 30 years, our capital account is performing way above any basic level that we should be following.
I'm not suggesting for a moment that it's not, and I've never and would not suggest that you are not a highly reputable and successful organisation. What I asked you was a slightly different question. If you have a situation in which a beneficiary of an estate can draw down revenue but cannot touch capital, do you think it is entirely wise for him to be party to discussions on that matter?
Well,
when transfers between capital and revenue are being discussed in the governing council of that
But the Prince of Wales is in the position to be able to decide on what disposals are made. That is his choice, but it is subject to the Treasury approval. So if we get into a situation where we were carrying out capital transactions that the Treasury felt were damaging to the estate, and as I say, I think this is a system that works extremely well. The capital account is protected. It's thoroughly, I mean, the capital account is, if anything, I would say that it may not be about governance, but the particular characteristic of our current beneficiary is one where he puts in much more than he takes out in almost every activity he gets involved in.
I'm sure that's absolutely right, which is why I'm sure that you have nothing to fear from full transparency in front of Parliament. Mr Jenkins.
Yes, Mr Ross, I think the issue of concern to the committee is not the fact that the present incumbent in any way is not totally concerned and committed and does an excellent job. It's whether the rules are in place to stop any future incumbent being able to misappropriate the way the system operates. And when you look at the list, I mean, these obviously didn't come out of a newspaper advertisement. They come out of, well, you can just look at the individuals on this list and they are the friends of the Prince of Wales. So, although albeit maybe the Duke of Westminster has a large investment himself, a large portfolio, and knows what it does to operate property. But I was interested when you said that one of these on the list is a tenant farmer. Did I get it
He's
right?
not a tenant farmer of the Duchy of Cornwall, no. No, he is there as a representative of one of our major sectors of business. So he is there, if you like, as a kind of independent watchdog.
A pseudo-tenant farmer.
Sorry?
He's speaking on behalf of tenant farmers.
He's on the Prince's Council very much as a free operator, yes. Yeah. He has close contacts with very many of our tenants and articulates at the Prince's Council and at our other committees, the Agricultural Committee, the concerns about agriculture, the concerns about the Agricultural Holdings Act.
I'm just wondering on this list where the local community, where their interests are being looked after, taken on board.
The area that we're recognised in as having the most high profile, if you like, which doesn't actually make any difference to the management of the rest of the state, is Cornwall. And we have a representative that sits on the Prince's Council to take into account the interests of the people of Cornwall.
Is that a representative of the people of Cornwall as far as... Is there a name to that person?
He lives in Cornwall. He's a professional. He's a solicitor. He has land himself. He's Mr. Code.
Okay. But you notice our concern, the fact we still feel that they would be better with the balance and the more appointment system, more structured to what we're used to seeing today, where places are advertised, people are selected by an appointments panel and put on there to run it. But I'll take it that you've got a different approach. And I want to go through one or two of the questions that we answered the chairman. I've got a list of questions the chairman asked you and the replies, which I thought were quite enlightening. The way you replied to them. Because I'll read the answers to you and then I'll come back with a supplementary question if I can. I asked you about the Sir Robert Smith's report, Audit Committee's Combined Code of Guidance, published in January 2003. And you said, the guidance is for limited companies. However, the Duchy has taken on board the recommendations where it is considered suitable for the Duchy's particular circumstances. Well, that might be excellent, but what in the code is not suitable for the Duchy's circumstances?
First of all, we're not a company. I mean, that I would have thought was one of the most significant points.
Okay.
We're a trust. It's more like a trust than a company.
Yeah.
But we do try to follow the code that has been set out in as many ways as we can, which is audit committees, remuneration committees, committee meetings, internal reporting features, all those.
Okay. So what you're saying is we cherry pick. We pick the bits that we like, we don't pick the bits we don't like. Right?
The report says exactly that small companies are encouraged to, but where they do not, they are not perceived to be breaking the code.
Okay.
I can't find the exact wording, but we do follow this quite carefully.
I'll go on to another answer then. The Duchy is a risk-averse organisation. The impact of debtors and creditors on the risk profile is minimal. Right? It is then finished off. It is not considered that any further information related to risk will be useful to the reader of the accounts. Well, we're a company who actually likes risk assessment. As a committee, we'd like to see the risk assessment. And I ask you why you thought that any further information on risk would not be suitable to the readers of the accounts.
Well, I may ask Mr. Willis to elaborate on this. But the detail that we give, we have discussed with the Treasury. They've issued the directives, and we feel that meets the purpose of which we've been asked to fulfil under the Management Act. The Management Act, the point about the Management Act is that they looked at this whole subject of governance in a great deal of detail in 1982. It was debated at great length by various houses and special committees, and it's the legislation that was passed satisfied the subject that we're discussing at the moment.
Okay. The next one you answered was, the Duchy does not consider to be any assistance to the reader of the accounts to disclose the names of individuals within the salary bandings. Right? So that you've got salary bandings, we've got numbers, we've got no names. Why do you consider it inappropriate to name the individuals on that particular salary banding?
Well, the only member of the Prince's Council who is executive is myself. All the others are employees, and I think the normal procedure is that this banding procedure is the appropriate method of disclosure.
I was looking at the on page 15 of your report, and it says that the salary banding there, we have something like there are now 4 on 40,000 to 49,000, 4 on 50 to 59,000, there's 1 on 60 to 69,000, there's 2 on 80 to 89,000, there's 1 on 120 to 130,000, and there's 140 to 150,000. I'm not on about the sole member on the council, I'm on about the list of employees you've got as a trust. So why have they not got names for these people on this banding? That's all.
Do you think to pick that or not?
We basically follow best practice. That is a practice for a non-listed company.
Oh. The difficulty we've got here is we what's called a public spending committee, and we like to look at public monies, and you like to look at this as a shrouded secret society, where it's a limited company, or not even a limited company, but some personal fiefdom you all sway over. Now, why are the names of the individuals not there in the banding?
In simple terms, they're not there because we don't think it would add anything to the basic user of these accounts.
Right. Once again, we like accountability, we like openness, and we like transparency. And to be honest, I'm not particularly interested in what you think, right? But I'm interested in what the British people think. I'm interested in what the shareholders think, the people who have ultimate ownership of this territory think, right? And what I'm saying is, if we put the information out there in the public domain, there can be no difficulty then, no misunderstanding of what we're asking, what we're seeking, right? Yeah. It is the fact that when I see the answers, every single answer, and I can read a few more out, appears to hide behind the regulations rather than give an open, transparent and accountable approach to it. Because next one, the amount of bad debts or debts written off on third-party assets are immaterial and therefore considered to be little consequence or add little to the accounts. Says who?
Well, the question is what effectively is material. I think that accountancy standards would suggest that might be something in the order of 5% of revenue. Our bad debts are less than 0.25% of revenue. They are not material.
And there's not the amount of the debt that I worry about. It's the attitude if it's immaterial. So why should we bother? Why should we disclose anything on this? And the next one, the receipts from this bona vacati, which do not pass through the revenue accounts, as all income is paid after expenses and after ex gratia payments to the Duke of Cornwall's Benevolent Fund. The balance due to the Benevolent Fund is immaterial. Well, what are the ex gratia payments that are made out of this money before it gets paid into the Benevolent Fund? And what are the expenses before it gets paid in the Benevolent Fund? I thought it was all going directly into the Benevolent Fund.
The receipts last year of our Benevolent Fund were £38,000, and the funds distributed were in the region of £71,000. It is a charity, and this is information that would be available through the charity registers if required.
No. Just want to ask you one thing, because I noticed on the charity thing, and there's lots more I could ask. The charity donations amounted to 98,000 from the Duchy, including 70,000 from these free gifts for the people who died intestate. And then it goes on to say that approximately 20% of the total grants were made to education and agricultural charities, and the other 80% went to a variety of charities. And I just thought, is all this listed somewhere? Can we actually see these amounts, these figures in these charities?
Well, the terms of our fund is that the money goes to the relief of persons in needs, provisions of homes of rest, hospitals and convalescent things, advancement of education, arts, religion.
Now, will you answer the question, please? Is there a list of what amounts go to the specific charities available to us in that?
There is within the charity accounts, yes there is.
It is
within the registered charity. It complies with the charity's disclosure and will list the major donations.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Time's up, unfortunately.
Mr. Bacon.
Mr. Willis, perhaps I could pick up where you just left off. You said within the charities accounts, you're saying then that if one were to look at the accounts for the Prince's Trust or for business in the community, or for the Architecture Foundation, one would find there the recipients of particular donations. Is that what you're saying?
If you look, the registered charity that Bonaventure is paid to, there is a separate registered charity known as the Duke of Cornwall's Benevolent Fund, registered in its own name, and that set of accounts will show all of the major donations that the charity has made.
Right. I think, Mr. Ross, you mentioned earlier that some 3.2 million was paid on staff salaries, and that's out of the surplus of 11.9 million. Is that right?
That is that is the information that I have, not because I'm involved with it, but simply because of the publication of the household accounts, which is now produced every year by the Prince of Wales' office.
Right. When I was first elected, we were all invited to go, and I don't know how many members did, but I certainly did, to go and listen to a presentation on the various charitable activities that the Prince of Wales engages in. And James Naughty of the BBC did a sort of introduction, and in 90 minutes one got a very good snapshot of the various different activities that the Prince of Wales does, and that was very helpful to me. Do you think that the Duchy does enough to publicise all those activities? Because I haven't had anything since. That was 3.5 years ago, and it's the last kind of explanation or contact that I had, and I was very impressed with the explanation of what was going on. But do you think you do enough?
Well, there's a divide here. There's two interests. One is the charities run by the Prince of Wales' office, which is effectively that document and other documents produced by the Foundation and others. The issue of the Duchy of Cornwall's corporate social responsibility, if I could call it that, is something we produce a Duchy review on from time to time basis. I think perhaps the answer is no to your answer to the question. I think we could do a great deal more.
Yes, I think you probably could. I mean, it's very interesting in the report to see what is happening in Poundbury and places like that. But I was referring, of course, to the well-known charities of the Prince of Wales. But I take it they are, in the sense that you're describing, not part of your responsibilities. In the sense that once the monies are passed over, they cease to be your responsibility, and the Prince of Wales then disperses them to charities or to his private income or whatever. Is that what you're saying?
That is right.
Yes. The 11.9, you mentioned that the Prince of Wales pays tax, or voluntarily pays tax. What kind of tax? Is that income tax?
He pays tax on a voluntary basis in exactly the same way as any other taxpayer.
Right. So presumably, if he's giving money to charity, that would be able to be offset against this 11.9 million.
The Memorandum of Understanding defined the areas of costs that are incurred by the Prince of Wales that are not chargeable to tax. In other words, in other languages,
part of his official duties and so on.
Official duties and charitable.
Right, okay. And then the rest of it is subject to tax and has tax levied on it.
Yes, the official duties, it represents something over 50% of his income. About 30% of his gross income is left available to the Prince of Wales for his private use.
Right, okay. Mr. Clark, I'd like to ask you about the Duchy of Lancaster. On page 12 of the accounts, it states that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Mr. Alexander, for the period, there's just a line next to basic salary and fees. I take it then that during the period, Mr. Alexander, as Chancellor, was not paid anything?
The Chancellor has the right to a sum of £2,000 a year, and Mr. Alexander in this case chose not to take it because I think it has an effect on his parliamentary salary.
Right, he waived it.
He waived it.
Where he'd have just lost 2,000 from his parliamentary salary if he had taken it.
Absolutely.
Right. Who is the Chancellor now?
Alan Milburn.
And what does Mr. Milburn get paid?
He does not wish to take the 2,000 either.
He doesn't take the 2,000 either.
No.
So the salary that Mr. Milburn is paid from public funds is not paid by the not paid by the Duchy.
No.
Who is it paid by? The Treasury.
I don't know who pays. I have no idea.
Mr. Glixman, who pays Mr. Milburn's salary if it's not the Duchy of Lancaster?
Well, I would guess it's paid...
You would guess?
I would guess it's paid from the same sources as all other ministerial salaries, but I would have to check on
Well, that's you, isn't it? You're the Treasury.
Yes, in the sense that the Treasury provides funds to departments for paying salaries.
Right. So you're saying that he's paid a salary in the same way that the Secretary of State for Health or the Secretary of State for Education or whoever would be paid a salary?
That is my guess, but I would have to check to give you a definitive answer.
Right. Mr. Glixman, on page 1, it says, on July the 1st, 2000, the then Chancellor revocably delegated certain functions, particularly those relating to asset management, to the Council. And the current Chancellor, it says on the 26th of June 2003, reconfirmed the revocable delegation. I take it that was the then current Chancellor, Mr. Alexander. Presumably the revocable delegation is still in place, is it? Mr. Clark?
Yes, can I just answer that? In fact, what happens, it is a revocable delegation, and every time we have a new Chancellor...
He revokes it again?
Yes, it is
right.
re-signed.
Right, so did Mr. Milburn then revoke this delegated...
he has granted the delegation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Mr. Milburn revocably delegated certain functions in the way that previous Chancellors had done?
Correct.
Right. So what does Mr. Milburn do for the Chancellor? What does Mr. Milburn do for the Duchy of Lancaster?
He is the Chancellor and he sits...
That's what he is. What does he do?
I was going to explain. He receives all papers for all meetings. He has been up to Lancashire and had a look round and has met a number of our tenants.
He's been to Lancashire?
He's been to Lancashire.
And did the Duchy meet the costs of his trip to Lancashire?
No.
Who did?
I don't know.
Mr. Glixman? Who met the costs of Mr. Milburn's trip to Lancashire?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, Mr. Bailey.
Sir John? Does the National Audit Office... Who met the costs of Mr. Glixman... Freudian slip there. Who met the cost of Mr. Milburn's trip to Lancashire if it wasn't the Duchy of Lancaster and the Treasury doesn't know?
Well, I don't know either who met those costs.
Perhaps he hitchhiked.
He did undertake work for the Duchy to the extent he met tenants, but he went to meet with Hilton Dawson in Lancaster.
Right.
Same day.
Who's a Member of Parliament?
Indeed.
Right. So what I'm trying to get to is, what does Mr. Milburn, who's the Chancellor, do for his £127,000 of public money?
I beg your pardon?
What does the Chancellor of the Duchy do for his £127,000 of public money? He's the Chancellor of the Duchy. He's the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. I'm trying to find out what, because he gets paid £127,000 of public money, doesn't he? That's right, isn't it, Mr. Glixman?
Who does?
The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster gets paid £127,000 of public money, isn't that correct?
I don't know, I'm afraid I'd have to look it up.
I'm just trying to find out, given that he is the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, what does he do for this £127,000?
We do not pay him £127,000.
He's not paid £127,000?
Not by the Duchy?
Not by the Duchy of Lancaster?
No.
No, but he is paid £127,000, isn't he, Mr. Glixman?
I don't know.
I can't verify the figure, but he is a member of the Cabinet.
He's a member of the Cabinet, yes. But he's paid in his capacity as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, isn't he?
Well, he has the title of Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
I think
he's also a member of the Cabinet.
If I can just explain, I mean, the appointment of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, it's an appointment by the Queen.
Yes.
And it is out with his duties as a minister.
Right. So does he have another ministerial title as well that I don't know about? Perhaps he does.
Not within my remit, I don't know.
Mr. Glixman? No. Could I ask a slightly different question? And that's about the nature of the phrase public money, because we've been banding this phrase around. This is the revenues from this landed estate are the surplus, the net surplus of these revenues from this landed estate are handed over to the Prince of Wales as his private income, and the same in the relation to the Duchy of Lancaster. But they are monies from an agricultural landed estate in the same way as the Duke of Westminster has a landed estate, or the Duke of Bedford, or whoever else. So, in what sense are they public money? Do you regard them as public money in that sense?
That's a very good question. No, I don't. The fact is that I don't want to go back because I know time is limited, but when the Duchy of Lancaster was first created, Henry Bolingbroke created the first prenuptial agreement to the extent that he actually inherited the duchy before he was king, and he bought the duchy when he took over the monarchy. He bought the duchy to it, but he wanted to make absolutely sure that it was dealt with as a separate inheritance out with the estates that he took over as monarch. And so the Charter of 1399 was created, and that charter very specifically states that it is a separate inheritance under separate administration from the Crown Estates.
So that, for example, in the same way that Sandringham, we know, is privately owned by Her Majesty the Queen, whereas Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace are property of the state, are you saying this would be regarded in the same way as Sandringham, as private property?
Yes.
Although the capital can't be accessed in the same way, but essentially it's private property.
No, the capital can't be accessed, but it's like a statutory perpetual trust.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Mr. Allen. Following up that line of questioning, I mean, it seems to me that Parliament over time has gradually encroached more and more on the royal possessions. We're squatting in a royal palace at the moment. But is it right to see that Parliament could, through primary legislation, attempt to do something different with the capital? Parliament set the rules for the capital in the two duchies, and Parliament therefore could change the rules. Is that a correct interpretation?
Well, I think you have to go back a bit. I mean, a charter was a very early form of act, and so the only way that the control could be placed on ensuring that capital was not whittled away by perhaps a life tenant who had other ideas as to how it was to be spent. Parliament obviously had to pass an act, because that was the only way to place rules over a charter that was then created by a king.
Can we examine how tightly you are defined? I mean, both of you, because you've got different rules from different acts. I guess starting with Mr. Clark, do you have to go to the Treasury for permission to carry out large capital transactions in the same way that Mr. Ross has told us the Duchy of Cornwall does?
No, we have a different form of governance, to the extent that the Queen appoints the Chancellor, as I mentioned earlier on, out with his role as a minister. And the Chancellor has delegated. In the old days, our council was also advisory, but the power was really settled in the Chancellor and indeed the Clerk of the Council, which was myself in old days. Now it's very different, because the Chancellor delegates the authority to Council. Council is far more akin to a board of a company, and they take responsibility and have fiduciary responsibility for the fact and for the decisions and the strategy that we follow.
So the Treasury wants a lot more detail from the Duchy of Cornwall, trusts them less in the sense that it trusts you. Your council has a lot more freedom from Treasury than the Duchy of Cornwall's council does. Is that, Mr. Glicksman, you're looking at me, is that correct?
Yes, it's not so much a question of whether the Treasury trusts them more or less, it's a question of what the legislation says.
The legislation trusts them more.
The legislation
entrusts them with more freedom. Yeah. Can I ask Mr. Glicksman, in respect of Mr. Ross's points, you then presumably have bits of paper floating around the Treasury asking for permissions for lots of individual transactions?
The Duchy of Cornwall, under the Management Acts, is required to get Treasury approval for all significant capital transactions.
Has anyone asked for these under Freedom of Information legislation yet?
Not that I'm aware of.
But presumably they could, and you would have to judge them in the normal way?
Yes, anybody could ask for them. We would have to judge them under the criteria in the legislation.
Not that I'm suggesting that. Can I ask, again, both of you, Mr. Clark and Mr. Ross, have you taken advice on whether or not you're public bodies for the purpose of the Freedom of Information Act, and what the results of that advice was?
We're not public bodies, we're exempt.
That's
from
clear.
The Crown, yeah.
We're the same. Same again. Can I ask about the council, Mr. Clark, again? Your council, you said it's more like a board of a public company. Can you just briefly describe what happens when a vacancy occurs? One of your council members goes.
Yeah.
What actually happens then,
Well,
so that Mr. Steenberg can apply?
Yeah, absolutely. I should look forward to the CV.
He's writing a CV now.
We have actually, as I mentioned earlier, we have just appointed 2 new council members. Sir Christopher Howes retires this year, and we were looking for 2 particular disciplines, one in property and the other in the financial market. The posts were advertised on the Cabinet Office website, and we employed an appointments specialist to seek these new appointees. They produced a short list for our consideration. We held a number of interviews over a 2-day period. The interview panel comprising of myself, the Chairman of Council, and the Keeper of the Privy Purse, together with Lord Shuttleworth, and we had Mr. Taylor from Treasury acting as an independent member of that interview panel.
And is it according to what we would call Nolan principles, all of the sort of normal principles for public appointments, do those apply?
We certainly attempted to follow them, yes.
And can I just ask Mr. Clark about this question about opening up your books to the National Audit Office? In terms of what you were saying, that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is responsible, and part of the additional freedom you have, I guess, reflects the fact that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster is accessible to us. Could the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster then say, I want to open our books to the National Audit Office? Is that in his power? He's the person who can decide?
He could make the suggestion. I think the matter would be discussed by Council and I think would have to be discussed with the Lieutenant. But we take the view that because it is a private estate, and as I've explained the little history lesson I gave, as a private estate, we have a firm of auditors who undertake the work for us. We feel very satisfied with that. We feel that our accounts are open and have a number of items that give the reader a very good idea of what is happening within our organisation. And we just don't see the need for NAO to come in and deal with the audit.
But if we want to understand the key people who are making those decisions, I think we understood from the Duchy of Cornwall side that's really in the hands of the Prince of Wales. But from your point of view, then it's in the hands of the Council, effectively, speaking to the Lieutenant and speaking to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
I think it's something that would come up within our audit committee, which hopefully will be set up very soon. But that would be part of Council. And the audit committee would review in the normal way the fact that auditors, their appointment should be reviewed now and again.
There's a division now, so I'm afraid we have to break for a few minutes.
No problem.
There might be 2 votes. Have you heard there might be? Right, gentlemen, I think we're in quorum and we can now start. Mr. Allen.
Okay, I think I was talking about your council in the Duchy of Lancaster, and I just have a very specific question, which is to know how many times your council met last year. We know from the Duchy of Cornwall report that the council met all of twice. How often does your council meet?
6 times.
6 times. It's every 2 months.
Yep.
They have a meeting. And do you have subcommittees and so on, like the Duchy of Cornwall?
No, we don't. We're not big enough really to justify having subcommittees. So when we go through the corporate governance exercise, then there is every possibility that there will be an audit committee.
Thank you. And can I ask, in comparing the two reports of the two duchies, I was very interested in the Duchy of Lancaster because, of course, most of your land is in the county of Yorkshire, my correct side of the Pennines. But you don't have any statement like the Duchy of Cornwall, which of course has most of its land in Devon, where they have a nice cuddly statement saying that they try and balance up a series of objectives, which I liked. That one of the objectives was that it was in the interests of those people who will live in, earn their living from, or simply enjoy duchy property given due weighting. That's in their report on page 2. And the duchy does have this very sort of people-friendly reputation. The Duchy of Lancaster report didn't have anything like that. Do you have a similar ethos that you're also acting in the interests of tenants in Yorkshire and you're not a hard-nosed, wicked business trying to extract the last penny from them?
No, we have very similar philosophy. In fact, we don't have a formal statement within our accounts, but if you go to the website, there is in fact some statements on that regarding our commitment and continuity. And we do try and work with our tenants. It's a partnership. The only way that we can have a sustainable income is to ensure that our tenants have sustainable businesses.
Do you think that leads to different forms of decision making from a purely commercial landlord?
I think we have to work, we have a fiduciary duty to ensure that we are achieving the correct rents and we're trying to maximise our returns. But against that, there is always the balance that one wishes to ensure that you don't price a tenant out of the market. Otherwise, that negates the benefits of having a successful business.
But that kind of policy will be set by your council?
Yes.
And in the case of the Duchy of Cornwall, it seems to be very much more hands-on that the policy is set by the Prince of Wales himself. Is that correct, Mr. Ross?
Yeah, I think that's correct. It is the way that our duchy is structured, more that the Prince of Wales does have a direct hands-on. And our involvement in all these things is enormous. I mean, it's something that I would love to take up a lot of your time. But things like Poundbury and the built environment, the home farm, we have, I think, over 100 visitors a year to those sort of things. We have an infinite number of meetings with different organisations to share our views.
Just ask on that. So something like Poundbury is a big capital investment. Is that effectively that decision effectively made by the Prince of Wales personally, or is it the council that makes that kind of decision?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the
decision to invest in Poundbury, which everybody's aware of, is that decision to go ahead, put that money in there, a big chunk of the capital of the estate?
The real value was generated when it was land that was allocated for development. And what the Prince of Wales decided to do was to depart from conventional types of development so that he could make his architectural...
I think I understand that but there was clearly an investment decision. I'm just trying to ascertain whether that was a personal decision. The Prince of Wales would look at the business plan and say, let's go for it.
I wasn't around at the time. There was a very strong influence by the Prince of Wales on this, and it was a matter that we did go into in a great deal of detail
but
with the Treasury.
In the case of the Duchy of Lancaster, it wouldn't be Alan Milburn who made that kind of decision. It would be the council sitting down and making that sort of decision.
Absolutely. The council sets criteria by which we're to undertake any form of investment. We have set returns that we wish to try and achieve.
And just finally, I want to touch on was bona vacantia, which is a lovely principle. I just love the word, which I think was the same principle we used to use to plant flags on entire countries and claim them. And now it only applies to unclaimed estates in certain parts of the UK in this context. Can I just check, in terms of the Duchy of Lancaster, it says that you use this money to pay for the costs of the administration of the magistrate service there.
Yes, we are responsible at the present time, up until the 1st of April this year. We appoint magistrates and we have advisory committees that assist and make recommendations that we then put to the Chancellor.
And in other parts of the country, that would be Department for Constitutional Affairs expenditure?
Absolutely, and as from the 1st of April, it will be in our area as well.
Very last question. Can you explain this lovely Anglo-Saxon word, escheat? I just wanted to get that into hands.
That's much the same. That's a company which has ceased to trade
and that's
comes back to us.
Escheated property.
We are the owner of last resort.
That's very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Angela Browning.
Could I just clarify, Mr. Clark, you outlined the procedure for people being interviewed and appointed to the Council of the Duchy of Lancaster, but I read in my notes that it is on the advice of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Is that purely a rubber stamping exercise?
What happens is the Council will undertake the interviews. They will make a recommendation to the Chancellor, who will then make a recommendation to the Queen, who will make the appointment, and it comes back down the line again.
And is that a rubber stamping exercise?
The Chancellor will look and will ensure that we've done all the things that we should have done in relation to that appointment. And so he's aware and knows the procedures we've gone through.
But would never overturn your decision?
I can't speak for the Chancellor. He could.
Thank you. Could I bring you back, gentlemen, to something that was raised right at the beginning and has sort of been throughout these deliberations? And this is this question of the capital account and the revenue account and the transfer of money. I just want to clarify, because you've answered a lot of questions on this, but ultimately of the 1.2 million, you said that 600,000 actually had only been drawn down of the original application, and that was all fine as far as the Treasury was concerned. I wonder if Mr. Glitzman, you could just tell us, when these applications come forward, what are the criteria behind what the Treasury will and won't allow on something specific, which, as we read, isn't the norm in terms of the process here?
There are 3 statutory criteria that we have to look at. We have to balance the interests of the current and future dukes. We have to consider the interests of people living in the vicinity who may be affected, and we have to consider whether it is conducive to the good management of the duchy.
Thank you. So in this particular case, where over the last 5 years we've seen in the Duchy of Cornwall revenue surpluses of 72% and the capital account appreciating by some 50%, is it just that 1.2 million looks a pretty small sum in those circumstances, or do you actually challenge why this money is needed for transfer?
No, we look at each case carefully. We don't consider 1.2 million to be a small sum.
Thank you. And have there ever been occasions when there's been an application for a similar transfer that you have felt was not appropriate?
Well, we try to keep in close touch with the duchy to ensure that they are aware of the approaches that we would take towards particular transactions, and try to ensure that transactions don't come forward that we might find difficult to approve.
Thank you. I wonder if I could just come on, Mr. Clark, to you, because we've seen exchanges of correspondence between yourself and the chairman of this committee in the months of last year. And I have to say, looking at your letter to our chairman on the 11th of June 2004, you didn't sound best pleased at the thought that all this was going to occur in terms of scrutiny and production of accounts. I see you're smiling now. It didn't look as though you were smiling when you wrote the letter of the 11th of June. In particular, you said it's not believed that anything can be gained by such consent being given, etc., etc. You'll be familiar with the letter. I wonder if you've had time to reflect on that, and whether you and perhaps Mr. Ross could answer whether you actually think there is something to be gained by being more transparent with the accounts of the duchies.
First of all, that letter, quite correctly, on reflection, was felt to be slightly terse, and I apologise to the committee for that. Hence, the chairman followed it up with a much better crafted letter than I did. I think that there is obvious value in transparency, and we try very hard to achieve that transparency. There are areas that this exercise has brought to our attention, and we will be looking at in the production of our accounts in the coming year. Certainly, from the point of view of the PAC and the NAO, we do firmly believe that we are a private estate. I've done my little bit of history. I'm not a history scholar, but it's the best I could do. And we do feel that as a private estate, we should continue to be run as a private estate, utilising consultants from the open market who are professional and can undertake a task which serves our purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Ross.
I would say that, well, frankly, coming before this committee is a daunting procedure. We have taken it extremely seriously. I would also like to take away a relatively positive view about the whole process. It is something that makes one look very carefully at all the subjects that have been addressed today. And I feel that these are things that we will take away and look at in a constructive way.
I mean, I hope you will take it of course, that this committee is looking at value for money, because there is a value for money in the public interest here, not least because of the tax concessions that were mentioned earlier. No capital gains tax paid, no corporation tax paid, and as a result of those tax breaks, it is important that perhaps this committee should have more access to information, and particularly Sir John Bourne have more access to information in order to put reports before this committee. Do you feel perhaps in the future you would be more open with information that we might want to look at?
Well, you've got to take the point that this is the first time this subject has been raised with us. We as Mr. Glixman has said, we have regular meetings with the Treasury, and we do cooperate, and we don't sort of dogmatically resist everything. We do go along with their proposals. I think, as he said, there have not been any areas of total disagreement. In fact, I can't even remember in my time any areas of marginal disagreement. We report the cases thoroughly, and we are genuinely pleased that we do present the accounts in the way that we do, but we still take into account the points that have been raised today.
Thank you. I mean, you've said throughout this afternoon that you felt you should be regarded more as a trust than a company. But could I just come to, for example, the way you manage your property portfolio and the transparency there in the Duchy of Cornwall? For example, the fact that 80% of your properties are internally valued, 20% externally by names we would all recognise, but that under the generally accepted accounting practice, you don't actually disclose your value as qualifications for the 80% of your portfolio that is valued internally. Why is that?
We value our entire estates on a rotational basis. The external values we have are advised to our regulators. Our internal valuers act under the instructions of their qualified chartered surveyors, and they act under the directions of our professional advisors. And
property seems to be very important to you. I notice on the very first page of your accounts here, you pray and aid a whole range of things that involves the property and land base. And then further on in the account, on page 5, in particular, you flag up the fact that affordable housing featured highly within the Duchy over the year. And you also mention affordable housing, social housing, in the Poundsbury development. And further down, as a Devon Member of Parliament, I was very interested to see your interest in reinvestment in the Isles of Scilly, right down at the far end. Can you just tell us, in the Duchy's view, what is affordable housing?
Affordable housing is the provision of housing for... I don't have a particularly formal description.
It's a hard question,
it's a provision of housing that is affordable at the salary rates and the wages that are being paid in those areas. I mean, it is a formula, in fact, that is more clearly defined by discussion with the local authorities.
So how does the Duchy balance its recognition, particularly in the West Country, and the further west you go, of lower than average wages, higher than average house prices, and the Duchy's recognition and wanting to make a contribution to affordable social housing in the West Country? How do you balance that with your need to get a return and value for your capital investments?
Okay. Our view about rents is that in general rules they should be fixed at the open market rate with whomever you are dealing, because if you don't do that, then you are in many ways not being fair to the people who are paying the proper rent. We then have an obligation to get the proper rent through the Management Act, but what we can do is give concessions outside the rental negotiations, providing they are not binding on the future Duke. I mean, those are the terms. So what we tend to do is to negotiate rents, and this is away from affordable housing, I may say. We then negotiate rents and then look at the way in which concessions could be made as to residential tenants or to agricultural tenants or to commercial tenants.
For example, can you just tell me, the social housing in Poundbury, is that all rented property, or are people able to access lower cost purchase or
It's very much mixed, and we do administer that at the moment all through housing associations. So the Guinness Trust are the main occupiers of the house. Effectively, they take the land from us either on a lease or by purchase, build the houses, and then operate the affordable housing agenda.
Thank you very much. And can I just ask you, Mr. Clark, in terms of property in the Duchy of Lancaster, why was 2.3 million of property reclassified from property occupied by the Duchy to commercial property in 2003-04?
This was the Duchy offices where we occupied the whole building. It's a very complicated building, but One Lancaster Place sits on the end of Brettenham House, which overlooks the river by Waterloo Bridge. And we occupied the whole of the section, which was basically 4 floors, when we had far more staff. Now we've consolidated. What we're doing is refurbishing the building, and we're putting certainly 2 and a bit floors out onto the market when we've completed the works to let.
And why have you not disclosed who undertook the valuations of your property estate?
Well, we say within the notes to the accounts that we have chartered surveyors who undertake, and they undertake it in accordance with the Red Book, what we call the Red Book, which is the valuation Bible.
Right, and just to come back to Mr. Ross, I don't think you've actually answered my question about this 80% of your property that is valued by people whose qualifications aren't listed.
There is a frankly, I mean, there is a balance between properties being valued every year and properties being valued on a rotation.
But is there any reason why, however frequently you do it, or whatever the process is, you can't, as with generally accepted accounting procedures, list disclose the qualifications of the people carrying out the exercise? After all, it's quite an important aspect to your accounts as to how you value your capital assets.
Yeah, I do see.
Perhaps I could just say, though it's 20% by number that are valued each year externally, it is nearer 60% by value. So it's a fair hike in value terms, the 20% by number, 60% by value. But yes, we could indeed disclose more fully who the internal valuers are that are valuing the remainder.
And will you do that? Because that seems to me best practice. When you talk right at the beginning about benchmarking, I would have thought that was one of the common practices that could be quite easily benchmarked. It's just the sort of little thing that if you're reluctant to disclose those sort of things, which one would normally expect to see in accounts, makes people on the Republican tendency, of which I don't include myself, on the Republican tendency feel that somehow you're trying to cover something up.
No, I see the point. In fact, it is a process of getting round the estates as well, because this is a process that's been going on for 5 years since these valuations were disclosed. Our professional external valuers are valuing roughly on a fifth per year. They have now virtually inspected the entire estate, and then the information, the valuation process is still supervised by them on all the computer information that we have available, which is rental increases and things of that kind. I think the actual process is the visiting the properties by the professional valuers. So I still take your point, but the dominance of our professional valuers, partly because of the point that Mr. Willis has made, and also because of the fact that they have inspected all these properties, which are not changing at any great pace, I think gives good accountability.
Thank you.
Your last question will be relieved to hear from Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Ross, I wonder if I could ask you to clarify about the tax that's not paid, as it were, by Cornwall. It's been suggested to me that this is worth between 20 and 40 million pounds a year. Can you give me your estimate?
I couldn't give you such an estimate, but I'm surprised at the figure you said. Which figure have you said?
Between 20 and 40 million pounds a year you save by...
Which particular tax are we talking about?
Capital gains tax, corporation tax.
I'm not in a position to be able to comment on that. I mean, simply we don't have base values for a start for capital gains tax.
So you don't buy and sell anything at all during the course of the year?
No,
that
we do
well,
indeed.
You must be able to assess how much corporation and capital gains tax would have been, but what you haven't done so.
We don't have base values.
Could you give me could we have a note, Chairman, of how much the Duchy of Cornwall have saved during the last year by not having been paying capital gains tax and corporation tax? Could you provide that for us?
We operate our business within the tax systems that exist.
Well, that is that you don't pay any.
The Prince of Wales pays income tax.
No. I'm keeping the Prince of Wales money separate from the Duchy's money. I think it's important to do that. I'm sure you would agree. You don't pay tax, corporation tax or capital gains tax. I'm asking you if you can clarify for us how much that would have cost you had you been paying it. How much is the value of this tax avoidance worth?
I'm not in a position to be able to tell you that.
So you don't
because
know? Sorry, is that a don't know or a won't tell? I mean,
it is that we don't have the information about base values. I mean, if you don't have
if next year, okay, I understand it. If next year it was decided that you were going to pay tax, you're telling us that you couldn't possibly calculate how much tax you should pay.
Well, if you don't have a tax system, it's quite hard to make these calculations on base values.
You can't calculate. So I mean, the estimate of 40 million might very well be accurate. That effectively you're receiving £40 million subsidy from the taxpayer as a result of not paying tax. That figure is just as accurate as any other estimate that could be made.
I mean, you could say any figure. You could say 5 million. You could say 100 million. I don't think it bears any relevance. People have picked some figures up on a loose calculation. I don't really think it's my position to.
No, but you mentioned between 5 and 100 million there. Presumably, you know it. You know the estate better than I do. I mean, you're running it. You must have come to some conclusion. Well, I wonder if you could possibly give us a note that might assist us to value the tax exemption that your estate receives, because it may be that we want to take that into account in formulating a recommendation. Is that possible? Or is there, I mean, I want to be clear when you say you don't want to do it. Is this a don't want or just simply can't? Because if it's a can't, it calls into question, I would have thought, the competence of the operation.
At the moment, if you don't have base values, the capital gains means you've got a gain from here to here.
Yes,
we
I
have no
understand
base
that.
values. I don't know whether you would conject for us whether the base value is on 1982 figures or on.
So that's a won't say then, really, isn't it? Can I clarify your relationship with VAT for a moment? Do you pay value-added tax on anything?
Yes, we do.
On everything?
We operate, yes, to the normal VAT regime.
Just wanted to. Can I turn to your role as a property developer? I mean, the Prince of Wales has always been pretty strong on a number of issues, like, ethics and so on, and sustainability. I mean, could any of you, the property in which you have invested, be described as unethical or unsustainable in environmental terms?
If any, possibly.
Possibly. That's helpful.
We invest in a number of types of property.
Some of which might be in contradiction to the expressed views of the Prince, who chairs the board that makes the decisions.
We have to make certain balances.
No, I understand that.
Listen. I'm sorry. On the capital account and on the revenue account, we are charged by a variety of procedures to perform in a certain way. The Prince of Wales's views about environmental and sustainability are very, very strongly felt.
Indeed they
if it was on our own land, which indeed we're doing at Poundbury, those standards that you're referring to are very highly followed. If it was on land that we have acquired or for some reason is in our possession from historical reasons, that is going to be redeveloped. I mean, what's there already may not be in our control, but if it's going to be redeveloped,
but you've been there forever, so.
Sorry?
I mean, you've been there forever, so presumably if you
some of these buildings were put in place before the Prince of Wales was around.
Well, indeed, but you have the option to sell them, of course. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that you don't have base values.
Yes, so
you have the option to sell them.
These are the commercial criteria. I mean, we have something.
I do understand that, but the point I'm saying is that given that the Prince has expressed very strong views on this, I do find it surprising that you cannot give us an assurance that the property owned by the Duchy, all the property owned by the Duchy, none of it could be described as unethical or unsustainable in environmental terms. And it seems to me that there's one rule that the Prince would wish to apply to others, but one rule that he applies to his own investments.
We're trying to influence this in two ways. One, by setting an example, and another way by being involved with the people who occupy these properties, to whom we let, by showing the benefits. And the thing that we try to point out is that good practice and sustainability and commercial can come together.
Well, can you give us a list? Can you give us a list of the properties in which you have investments in order that we can make judgments as to whether or not they are ethical and sustainable?
We have something over 3,000 different agreements with people.
And is that a yes then?
That's the guess.
Or is that a no?
We have 3,000.
No, I'm asking whether or not you can give us a list of the properties in which you have money invested, in order that we and others can make an assessment as to whether or not those investments are ethical and sustainable.
It's a very judgmental issue as to what...
Well, are you willing to give us the information?
I'll discuss what is ethical and sustainable if it's something that you think would be...
I'm quite prepared to debate the issue, but will you make the information available about the investments in order that judgments can be made by you, I and third parties about what is ethical and sustainable?
I don't think this is an issue that
is that a no then? Is
relevant to this committee?
Well, I'm asking the questions and you provide the answers. That's the way in which the committee works. I am asking you whether you will provide a list of the properties that are held by the Duchy in order that we can measure whether or not they come up to the standard about which the Prince speaks so often and so movingly.
I think it's something I would need to have a great deal clearer understanding of, because who is going to be the judge of what is ethical and sustainable?
Public opinion. Well, the Prince has spoken at great length on this. We would measure them against the criteria he himself has set. But can we have a report on the list of properties?
I don't see why.
I know you don't see it, but I'm asking you, can we have it?
I don't think it would serve any better
No, you don't know that you don't think that, but I do, and I'm asking you a yes or no. Will you make available a list of the properties? I mean, are you refusing to do so?
I'm not saying no, but I still need to be persuaded there's a good reason to do so.
If you're not saying no, you're saying yes then. I mean, this is a simple yes-no question.
I'm leaving the question unanswered because I can't see the purpose it would serve.
Can I ask, given that the Prince has expressed strong views on out-of-town supermarkets and things that he described as carbuncles, can you tell us whether or not you own any of those?
The only supermarket that I'm aware of was one that has been built at Banbury that was subject to very stringent...
Right, so there are no other supermarkets or out-of-town superstores or anything similar?
We have other out-of-town industrial properties.
And
yes.
are they carbuncles?
They're ones that we have purchased for the commercial and the... I mean, again...
Is that a yes or a no? I mean, are they carbuncles or are they not?
What is a carbuncle in your opinion? Are they been built to...
Give me a list of them and let me see them.
They've been built to a very high standard.
Okay, you're refusing to do that. Okay, I understand that. Can I ask in terms of commercial development, I mean, because you don't pay tax, that is obviously going to affect the investment appraisal decisions that you make about what will give a return and so on and so forth. Do you think that that's unfair competition with other developers?
It's not an issue for me to be considering.
Okay, it's too complicated. Right, okay. Can I ask about judgments for property sales? And in particular, could I ask about 97 Park Road, Hampton Hill, which I understand was sold at considerably less than the market rate.
It was not.
To a Michael David Fawcett. Well, it wasn't sold at... How do you know it wasn't sold at less?
We had independent valuers that we appointed, and we got a Section 11 warrant from the Treasury.
Okay, and you know how much that property was bought for, do you?
I do.
So you'd be able to estimate the capital gains on that property at least, and therefore the scale of the value to you of being exempt from capital gains tax.
I think we would, because I think we have a base value that the house was purchased.
So there are quite a lot of properties.
Again, it would be a theoretical.
So quite a lot of properties you could actually formulate your capital gains tax gains. Okay. Can I just clarify on terms of the independence of the Prince's Council, about which others have commented? Of the people on that, how many of them sit on other committees and subsidiaries that the Prince has control of, in particular Duchy Originals, Home Farm and other structures and organisations?
other organisations.
Of which the Prince has control or are involved?
I can't think of any.
None of them sit on anything else? So none of them have any other...
Can you think of...
No, well, perhaps
I'm sorry, there is. The Prince of Wales's private secretary does.
Right. In terms of the accounts of Duchy Originals and Home Farm, are they lumped in with the Duchy...
No, Duchy Originals is a totally separate operation.
Yeah,
It
so
has no financial link with us at all.
Can you just clarify for me then, Duchy Originals and Home Farm and any other enterprises that you have, where do their profits go? Do they come back into the Duchy of Cornwall?
The Home Farm is let to the Prince of Wales, so any profit and loss is his own personal business.
It's let to the Prince of Wales at what? A reviewable rate?
Full market rent, established by independent valuers.
Right.
And then the other question, Duchy Originals. All the proceeds, Duchy Originals is a trading company. It's a subsidiary of a charity. All the proceeds go into the charity.
Right, thank you. In terms of the relationship with the Prince of Wales, could I just clarify what happens in circumstances where the Prince, say, comes to stay occasionally maybe in a duchy property or does something similar? You have no properties that would ever be occupied in any circumstances by the Prince?
We have one property on the Isles of Scilly which he hasn't occupied he hasn't even spent a night in for the last 25 years.
So there's...
the Highgrove, I beg your pardon, I've been corrected about Highgrove.
So clarify that about Highgrove?
I beg your pardon, Highgrove is owned by the Duchy of Cornwall.
Oh, sorry, right, Highgrove is owned, right, Highgrove is owned by the Duchy of Cornwall, that's interesting, okay. Can I ask, just in terms of capital works then that are undertaken at Highgrove, who pays for those? Is that the Duchy?
Capital works are usually paid for by the landlord, which is the Duchy.
Which is you. So the development of the orchard rooms, for example, would have been paid for by the Duchy?
Correct.
And was that competitively tendered?
I can't tell you that. I wasn't around when...
Can you give us a note?
I can give you an answer to that.
Right. In terms of the entertainment that takes place at Highgrove, of which I understand there's a fair amount, how is charging done in terms of costs? I mean, there must be costs incurred in, say, heat, light and so on and so forth. Is all of that met by the Prince because he pays the entire costs of all the building all the time?
It doesn't involve the Duchy of Cornwall at all. We let the premises to the Prince of Wales.
And there is no basis on which there is any subsequent then charge against the Duchy?
Absolutely no costs of any private matters brought by the Duchy of Cornwall.
Does the Duchy incur any costs at all in entertaining in any way whatsoever?
Yes, we do.
And are those competitively tendered?
The cost of entertaining? No.
Right. And are they disposed of, these contracts, any entertaining disposed of by Premier Mode?
None.
None at all?
We do no business with Premier Mode.
Right.
No, not on our account. I go and attend events that are hosted by the Prince of Wales.
No.
There's nothing the Duchy of Cornwall does.
No, that's fine.
Premier Mode.
Thank you much, Stuart.
There are one or two supplementaries from Mr. Williams, Mr. Jenkins and Mr. Allen.
Yes, I was interested. I was going to ask about Highgrove myself because I seem to remember at one time it was being said that the Prince himself paid for it, but I gather now the Duchy paid for it.
Pays for what, sorry?
The building of Highgrove?
We paid for the building of Highgrove. No, we didn't pay for the building of Highgrove. It was built about 300 years ago.
Whatever the cost was of Highgrove.
The Duchy of Cornwall purchased Highgrove.
The Duchy of Cornwall purchased it?
Correct.
Yeah.
And we now let it. It's set out in the memorandum of understanding that there is a proper agreement between the Duchy of Cornwall and the Prince of Wales for which he pays a full market rent that is, in this case, assessed by two separate valuers because of the sensitivity.
And who appoints those valuers?
We appoint one, the Prince of Wales office appoints the other.
When we were talking about the Prince's council, one was left with a rather confused picture of it in what's been a rather confusing debate of the way you switch money between capital and revenue as well. Who makes the final decision? How are decisions made, particularly on financial matters? And is it generally discussed? And do we have a democratic vote at the end of the council?
There's a very thorough...
Or does the Prince just say, thank you for what you've had to say, I decide so-and-so?
There is a very thorough reporting procedure that goes through our our own internal controls, our internal committees, and then goes to the Prince's Council. If it is a capital item, it then gets passed through the Treasury under the various warrants that exist for the process of these being approved.
So if there were a conflict between the Prince and the system, Treasury would come into play?
Correct.
Have there been any such
Between
cases?
the Prince and the system, we are constantly managing a balance, but our criteria are to provide an income for the Prince, to protect the capital assets.
How often have you had to call the Treasury in to overrule the Prince? Or to see if it wants to?
We haven't had to.
Pardon?
We have not had to.
You've not? I see. That's interesting. Okay. There's one other thing I wanted to look at, if you bear with me a second. So I got so many pieces of paper here. Coming back to the question of governance, which is obviously a matter of some concern to us, we obviously, as you appreciate, think that the CNAG should have a role. If he shouldn't have a role, what was the point in making you present your accounts to Parliament if we can't look into them properly?
The presenting of the accounts was a process that was set up in 180 years ago. It's something that has been changed by direction by the Treasury on a regular basis. And the format of the accounts are set out, the direction that we receive are set out. This is in accordance with their direction. It follows accountancy standards, and it follows company accounts.
So the council, could the Treasury change that unilaterally, those guidelines?
The Treasury have very substantial powers in these issues.
Sorry,
the Treasury have substantial powers, but equally the Prince of Wales has right, as the private owner of the estate, to make the decisions about the appointment of accountants and other such matters.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll take it.
I'm afraid it's been a long afternoon, gentlemen. We have to break one more time, but we are almost now at the end. You'll be relieved to hear. Well, there is still, you and Mr. Allen want to ask further questions, unless you want to forego that, right?
Question. I'm glad we got an answer to Mrs. Browning, and you are going to table in this the qualification of the internal auditors. But Mr. Clark, you've got another problem because you don't actually list your external auditors or your external evaluators as the regulations would ask you to do. So, would you list your external valuers?
Would we list our external? Yes.
Yeah, with their qualifications, and tell us how they got their job. Do they tender for it? Do they tender for this purpose?
They competitively tender.
I should say that there is some draft reports to the committee to consider in private, so we have to come back anyway. There's still Mr. Allen who wants to ask a question, so I'm afraid we're going to have to stay, gentlemen. I'm sorry. But it will be quite quick now after this short break. Gentlemen, did you hear the question of Mr. Jenkins while the bell was ringing? Would you like him to repeat it? Or can we take it that you did hear it and you provided no
I think it was addressed to me, Chairman. Was it in relation to would we list in our accounts the valuers that we had used in producing values? And yes, in answer to the question.
And also, I just want to know how they actually got the job. It was open into tender.
Yeah.
And the first. Sorry.
In the case of very large valuations, which the rural valuation is clearly the largest, that is done at tender.
Mr. Ross, I was just to ask, clarify the situation with Mrs. Browning's questions when she said you would list your internal valuations with the qualifications on the report as well.
We can do.
Excellent. Oh, the other question of Mr. Ross, which I was totally amazed when Highgrove came up, Chairman. I thought, honestly, that Prince of Wales had bought Highgrove out of his personal money and he'd got his foot on the property ladder. I didn't realise he hadn't.
Mr. Allen.
Very specific one, Mr. Clark. You said that from April the Department for Constitutional Affairs is picking up the costs of the magistracy in Lancashire.
Yeah.
Does that mean that all the extra money, which is quite considerable, 200,000, will be going into the charitable fund?
Yep.
They'll get a boost. And just the other one was, just finally from both of you, you've done very well with your capital growth because you're in property and property's done very well. If you were to do a church commissioners, as in to make some investment decisions that are not so good, and you came before us and the capital's gone down, who should we blame for that? Just to meet you, who's the person who's responsible after all this talk? If you came up to us and said capital's gone down 5% because we made some bum decisions, who should we go after?
As far as Lancaster is concerned, pre-2000 it would have been down to me. I'm delighted to say that post-2000, due to the revocable delegation, it is down to Council, of which I am one member.
The Council collectively. And in the case of Cornwall?
Well, I'm the executive, and then the process of what we invest in and what we sell is subject to these warrants that are run by the Treasury.
So you would blame the Treasury for having let you do it?
I think Mr. Glickson may answer you further, but I would be responsible.
You would be responsible. Mr. Glickson, do you agree with Mr. Ross?
Yes, I don't think we consider, when looking at proposals from the Duchy, whether it would be a good investment as opposed to the statutory criteria that we're required to look at.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Davidson has a supplementary, I think.
Yes. Can I just clarify with Mr. Ross one point you made earlier on about your role to protect the capital? And you said, did I catch you correctly, that all you needed to do basically was that it needed to grow in line with inflation, and that therefore you then, I draw from that you would regard yourself free to have the Prince of Wales drawing anything that is above just simply the rate of inflation of the capital? Or did I misunderstand you? What do you mean then by capital protecting?
It is the interpretation of what is providing an income for the future Dukes. And if you provide an income for the future Dukes, we cannot damage the existing capital asset. I mean, we can't.
So the existing capital figure plus inflation is sufficient in your view?
We regard that as an absolute minimum, but I mean that is the legal requirement. Yes.
Right. Can I just ask Mr. Clark whether or not there is anything in the running of the Duchy of Cornwall from which you think you can learn?
I think, in all fairness, I have learned more about the Duchy of Cornwall this afternoon than I knew before. So I think probably it'd be slightly unfair.
That applies to all of us, though, doesn't it? Really, that applies to all of us.
I actually haven't been following the Duchy of Cornwall and what they do with a great degree of detail. So really, I think it's a bit of an unfair question. I couldn't tell you.
Would it be reasonable, do you think, for us to draw the conclusion that there is a distinction between the way in which Lancaster and Cornwall are run, and that is a difference between professional and amateur, with yourselves being a much more professional outfit?
That's very flattering, but I don't think I could comment one way or t'other. I think we are different. We do operate in different ways. Our governance is different, but that has really evolved over the years and over the centuries.
Mr. Ross, do you think that's a fair comparison?
No. I mean, we have very different operations, but I think if you've got to look at the results, you'll see that there's nothing very amateur about the way we do our business.
Remind me again, can you give us a list of the properties and can you estimate for us the value of the capital gains you've made? Which I would have thought was a standard
We were talking
professional.
about the list of the properties from the environmental and the sustainability point of view.
No, just give us a list. Just give us a list. I mean, if it's professional, it's a question of competence and so on here. Are you able to give us a list of properties?
This is a private estate.
Is it not?
The terminology here
is it not held in trust for the nation?
Private estate. And the Prince of Wales and the Duchy of Cornwall are entitled to some privacy about this.
Privacy, but is it not held in trust for the nation?
It's a private estate. There are areas of considerable public interest, very considerable public interest, and I think those are accounted for, as I've said during the afternoon, by the procedures that we have in place.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Williams, one final question. Mr. Williams.
Yes, but explain to me as a non-accountant myself, there's this item that appears every year, total recognised capital gains. And for example, in 1993 it was 11,474,000. I've totaled up from 1995 to today, and in each of the accounts, and make it 225 million. But I don't know what recognised capital gains are, since you seem to be implying to my colleague Mr. Davidson that you didn't actually notch up capital gains.
I think I begin to see where Mr. Davidson's figure comes from. The point is that the vast majority of our gains that you're identifying are not realised.
As you identified.
Yeah, I know. You're all talking about it. They're not realised, and you don't pay any tax on an asset that isn't sold.
Yeah, it's just, again, it comes back to this issue of clarity, you see. I mean, I look at this, full of goodwill towards you, and I see this recognised capital gains. But you tell me they're not recognised and they're not capital gains. Otherwise, it's a perfectly correct description.
They are recognised gains. As I say, any other company would produce a statement of total recognised gains and losses. We are following best practice.
One final point that I've raised previously, and I promise you this is final, there's 2.3 million that was distributed from undistributable reserves. I don't know how it can be undistributable and then distributed, but there we are, that's what happened. Prince Charles had 833,000 at one stage in 93 and 2.3 million in 99 from you for purchasing his timber rights. Now, how I would have thought the timber rights were the Duchy's timber rights. Did he plant an apple tree in his back garden or something? I mean, what were his timber rights? And then, strange enough, in 1999, when you finally got rid of the whole of that reserve, dispersed it in various ways, on which I'd like a fuller note, if I may, you then, in a footnote, point out that from the end of that financial year, now timber rights are going to be treated, and growing timber will be treated as capital, therefore non-distributable. Why, until you got rid of all the money, a lot of it to the Prince, was it undistributable and revenue? And now suddenly you've changed your position and it's become capital. I don't understand how you intellectually get where you are.
Timber is a crop. And the crop is, unlike most crops, takes 50 to 150 years to grow.
Yeah.
It is harvestable when it's mature, but the asset, the timber, belonged to the Prince of Wales. He could either have sold it to somebody else.
It belongs to the Duchy.
Technically, I've used the wrong language. I'm sorry. It was on the revenue account, and therefore it was on the revenue account when the timber is felled or sold. That asset, because it had been paid for all the way through by His Royal Highness, was something that was distributable through the revenue account. The Prince of Wales chose a point of time when this timber should be sold, and it was a commercial decision made by him. The commercial decision by the Duchy of Cornwall was that it was right for us to buy. It was valued independently, and it is now entirely on the capital account.
I'd like to look at that answer. I may come back then with some written questions. Thank you.
Right, gentlemen, well, that concludes our hearing. It has been a very long afternoon, but we have waited since 1377 to have this inquiry, so I think it's right that it should be done properly. And I hope you feel from the questions that have been asked and the answers you've been able to give that there's absolutely nothing for the Treasury or for the duchies to fear about parliamentary scrutiny. To sum up, we believe that 2 duchies may be private estates in a special sense, as you've described them several times today. But it is true also to say that their accounts are presented to Parliament. As you reminded us, certainly the case with Cornwall, the Treasury is closely involved. This makes them, we believe, quite different from other private estates, such as the Grosvenor estate. And we believe that it would assist Parliament, gentlemen, in the examination of your accounts for the Controller and Auditor General, who helps us in these matters, preferably to be your external auditor, certainly to have access to the Duchess books and records. But we have made considerable progress this afternoon. We are very grateful for you coming here this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Order, order. There is private business for the committee, so if members could stay behind, please.